Okay, let's talk more communication. As always, please have notes out so that you can take notes during this time. We're going to talk about these four types of cell signaling pathways. We have autocrine, juxtacrine, paracrine, and endocrine. Autocrine, that prefix auto means cell. And if you look at this diagram that represents autocrine signaling, we have a ligand leaving a cell and then binding to a receptor on that same cell. So autocrine signaling is a signaling in one cell to itself. Juxtacrine, notice how we have two cells now and they're touching. They're very close and they're touching. Juxta, it has to be touching. We have one cell. The cell on the left is releasing that ligand that's binding with the reception or the receptor of the cell on the right, but the cells themselves are already touching through this process. Paracrine looks very similar to juxtacrine, but paracrine, nothing's touching. They're very, very close, para close, but they're not touching. This ligand is leaving the cell on the left and bonding with the cell on the right, and nothing is touching. Last but not least, we have endocrine. You might have heard this term before when you've heard something about hormones. So our endocrine system is our system that deals with hormones, and our hormones travel through our bloodstream to get to the places that they need to be. So this is long distance communication. We have one cell in some area of our body that's releasing a ligand and traveling through the bloodstream to bind to a receptor that's on a cell that's very far away. So we have like local signaling, so very close. And then we have long distance signaling. Okay, let's look at some examples. This first example here is with quorum sensing. This is that bacteria talking to one another like we learned in class. So based on the positions of these bacteria, which are these rod-shaped things here, what kind of communication do you suppose is happening here between these four? Autocrine, juxtacrine, paracrine, or endocrine? Quorum sensing, what do you think it is? Okay, now here is example 2. I have plasmodesmata connecting plant cells. These are plant cells, and these channels here are the plasmodesmata. So this cell can communicate with this cell through these channels by sending those signals. What kind do you think this is? Next up, action potentials. This is how our brain communicates with our body so that we can contract our muscles, we can move, we can walk, we can talk. This is how we do all of the things through our nerve impulses. This diagram shows two different nerve cells. The axon is just one end of one nerve cell, and the dendrite is the other end of the other nerve cell. The arrows are pointing to the ligand, or the receptors. So these are the receptors, and these are the ligands. What type of communication is happening here between this neuron and this one? Okay, so now we have another example, and it's not intuitive here, so you need a little bit more background information for this one. But this insulin did not travel from a cell that was close by. It traveled through the bloodstream over a long distance. Given that information, what type do you think this is? Okie dokie. Now we're going to dive into this a little bit more just because this process does look pretty complicated. And I want you guys to not be so intimidated by these because even though they do look intimidating, they're not that bad if you know how to analyze them. So, what is the ligand? Okay, the ligand is insulin. Can you point out what the receptor is? It's not labeled, but you should be able to recognize that the ligand binds to the receptor. So this here is the receptor. Okay, so what is the ultimate response? Okay, so I'm going to follow this. There's two different things happening. So one of the responses is that this MAPK pathway is turned on. Another response, this one requires more of a transduction pathway, but I'm just following the arrows. So the ligand binds. This molecule here activates this molecule here, which activates this, 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 which activates this. And then this GLUT4 protein travels to the cell membrane, and glucose is transported into the cell. That is the other response. And this is the main purpose of insulin. You probably know a little bit about insulin already. insulin is what diabetics have to inject into themselves every once in a while. This process is natural in those of us who are not diabetic, but depending on whether you're type 1 or type 2, there's multiple reasons why this process does not work in a diabetic's body. So they need to inject that insulin so that they can lower their blood sugar. If your blood sugar gets too high, that's dangerous for a number of reasons. So we need to somehow move that sugar from the blood into your cells. And that is what insulin does. Insulin binds. We have a series of things happening. This is the transduction. Ultimately, GLUT4 gets activated. GLUT4 moves to the membrane. And GLUT4 is the actual protein, transport protein, that allows glucose to move from the blood into the cell. So ultimately, insulin helps lower your blood glucose because it moves that glucose into your cell. Cool, huh? Let's look at one more example. This one here is actually from an AP test and it looks similar to the pathways that you're going to see in this class. So even though you can't see it, there was some sort of ligand bonding to some sort of receptor, and now the only thing that you can see is the actual pathway that happens once that thing is in the cell. So it's kind of nice that this one gives steps like 1, 2, 3 for different things that are happening. So first of all, let's kind of look at what's going on. Let's try to analyze this. Let's try to interpret this. So in step 1, inactive caspase becomes activated. So there's a number of things that you can tell from this. First of all, what activates it? What is responsible for inactive caspase becoming active? Okay, it's the bacterial infection. Here we can see this bacterial infection is what causes this process to happen. So without a bacterial infection, this would not happen. The bacterial infection is what causes this. Another thing that I can see is that the inactive version has this little particle bonded to it. So somehow, when the caspase has this particle bonded to it, it is inactive. But when it loses that particle, it's active. So we know that the bacterial infection is what causes this, but the reason why it becomes active is because whatever this is gets cleaved off. Now, this active caspase can do two things. They are completely independent of one another. So one of the things that active caspase can do is come up here and do what? It can activate interleukin. So interleukin was inactive, and then it became active because of this. What does active interleukin do? It leaves the cell. So active interleukin leaving the cell is one of the responses here. Now this process on the right is completely independent of this. So active caspase can also go over here to Gasdermin. And what does it turn Gasdermin into? It turns Gasdermin into N-terminal Casdermin. And then that N-terminal Casdermin can come up, embed itself in the cell membrane, and it becomes like a pore or a protein channel here. So this doesn't actually leave the cell. It incorporates itself into the cell membrane, becoming a pore or a protein channel that will likely allow other things to move in and out of the cell. This diagram doesn't tell me what that is. It stops there. So that's pretty cool. Some questions you might see from this would be, what would be the result or the consequence, or what would not be able to happen if interleukin couldn't be activated? So what would happen if interleukin couldn't be activated? When I have these types of problems, I find that thing and I cross it out. So if interleukin couldn't be activated, so this process here can't happen. I am stuck with inactive interleukin. Notice how that doesn't affect this process on the right at all. So Gasdermin will still become N-terminal Gasdermin, and that will incorporate itself into the cell membrane still, because this process does not require interleukin. The only thing that interleukin does is leave the cell. So if this process couldn't happen, then this process couldn't happen, because it's that active interleukin that leaves the cell. So if interleukin remains inactive, it will not be able to leave the cell. So everything that comes after that X can't happen. Anything that happens before can still happen. So all of these processes are still going on. What if I asked you what would be the consequence of caspase not being able to be activated? Okay, so in this case, if caspase can't be activated, meaning I'm stuck with inactive caspase, now everything that followed can't happen because this requires the active caspase, so this can't happen. This also required the active caspase, so this can't happen, so I am stopped here. I am left with inactive caspase 1, none of these processes occur. So that's kind of a way that you can interpret these just by following the arrows, seeing what happens where, and then you're going to have to eventually get good at analyzing and telling me what will happen if this can't happen, what would be the result of this, so on and so forth. All right, thanks for watching.